So while Trump's America continues to pointlessly push a Russia-Ukraine peace plan that neither will remotely accept, the EU's had a plan to keep Ukraine funded into 2026 and beyond, and be the moment Europe as a whole finally stepped out of crisis mode. You see, for months, officials in Brussels have worked on a mechanism to unlock more than $200 billion, not from taxpayers, but Russia's own foreign sovereign assets. A financial breakthrough, a historic precedent, a chance to prove that Europe could still act strategically under pressure. But over the weeks, something far more fragile has come into view. This entire plan, and Ukraine's core financial and therefore military lifeline, has been thrown off balance by one country, one institution, and one prime minister you'd not remotely initially expect. You see, as opposition hardens, trust erodes, and diplomatic patience runs dry, the EU isn't simply risking delay, it's exposing the exact fault lines that Moscow, Washington, and every skeptic of European unity already unfortunately suspect. So this story, and in this video, is not about money, it's about power, leverage, and the uncomfortable truth of how Europe behaves when forced to act under especially wartime pressure. Stick around for this one. It's incredibly important to the bigger picture.
This is The Global Gambit.
How you going, everyone? Welcome back to The Global Gambit. And if you're new here, well, this is a channel where we break down the geopolitical and economic decisions that actually shape world events, especially in this case, Europe's angle in the Russia-Ukraine war. Initially, I recorded this video outside, but then Britain being Britain, the weather and the heavens opened, and I had to resort to my lounge. But you see, a massive confrontation is now playing out inside the EU, largely hidden behind closed doors, one that could determine whether Ukraine has the financial and therefore military capability into next year. To understand what's happening, we need to begin with the moment everything went sideways. But before doing so, I ask you as always, what is the EU's legal and political risk here? Can it legitimately take Russian assets? And if so, should it? Let me know in the comments, because I'm genuinely curious. So let's start with the context. Late in October, in Brussels, apparent EU plans to send Ukraine a huge, multi-year financial lifeline backed by immobilised Russian assets. But what most don't realise is that for weeks leading up to this summit, diplomats have been genuinely positive about the potential of this, and there wouldn't be any political backlash. There was a sense, perhaps naive in retrospection, that Europe had finally found a mechanism that can sustain Kiev for years and reduce pressure on domestic governments about where money is being spent. You see, from some insights I've been told by those close to leaders, many were already talking about how the money should be spent. From the French perspective, buy European weapons. From the Finnish, let Zelensky buy what he needs from whoever he needs. But, unfortunately, beneath this confidence was one fatal assumption, that the Belgians, not Hungarians or Slovakians, and who is the custodian of most of the foreign assets, was on board. Belgium wasn't. Enter Bart de Wever, Belgium's new Prime Minister. Some people see him eccentric, others sharp-witted and blunt, and on this issue, absolutely immovable. He's told it very bluntly that if Russia wins any legal challenge, it'll want its money back, and Belgium alone will be forced to repay this entire amount. The point here is that initial drafts were rejected and rewritten, and de Wever, not Viktor Orban, was the one pushing back. And by the time many leaders had left, there has been no decision, no plan, no clarity. Ukraine has been left weakened in Europe, another demonstration of its division, with Donald Trump stepping in to push for this revised peace deal. Indeed, it's part of this reason that this flurry about a new form of peace deal gained traction, based on US adoption of a lot of Russian terms, mainly because Europe was seen as being incapable of providing its own. Now, that stark reality comes into the broader breaking down of what the plan actually involves, because on paper it's quite clever. In many ways, this proposal is the culmination of 2 years of frantic improvisation. Scrambling for ammunition money, plugging holes in Ukraine's budget, negotiating things like stopgap packages. This is the first time the EU has tried to move from crisis response to longer-term architecture, if you like. The European Commission proposes 165 billion in a loan to Ukraine, repayable only when Russia ends the war and pays reparation. Now, breaking that down, the loan is backed by what's known as immobilized Russian assets. 140 billion euros held in Euroclear, i.e. in Brussels. 25 billion in private accounts across places like France, Germany, Sweden, Cyprus and Belgium. and then another 45 billion to repay a previously agreed G7 loan, and the package overall reaches 210 billion. How would it be spent? Well, in initial ideas, it was 115 billion for Ukraine's defense industry to help it more develop in-house, 50 billion for basic state functions like wages, pensions, government, 90 billion for front-loaded over the next 2 years when Ukraine needs it the most, as in most accessible and most emergency. And then the real innovation is Russia pays later, Europe pays nothing now. Again, that was the idea. But why, therefore, is Belgium slamming the brakes here? Because the risks aren't theoretical, they're extremely real. So the reason Belgium is terrified in the eyes of some is that from the outside, it's easy to say, just use Russian money. Politically, it even sounds elegant, a way to make the aggressor pay without burdening taxpayers. But Belgium isn't looking at the narrative, it's looking at the liability sheet. This is where this story deepens and shifts from being purely about war and diplomacy to pure economics. Belgium's objection is not emotional, ideological, or geopolitical. It's rooted in that cold, technical assessment of exposure, financial, legal, and security related. If Europe crosses the line between using profits and expropriating assets, Russia challenges it in court, which, you know, it sounds ironic given it's broken every international law with its invasion, but if Moscow wins, even years from now, Belgium, as the home of the Euroclear, would be forced to repay the full amount. And Weaver is already scraping for 10 billion in Belgium's domestic budget. The idea of covering 10 times that is political suicide, especially for a new person who's just entered office. Second is Euroclear and Europe's credibility. Euroclear isn't a Belgian bank, it's a global financial pillar. If Belgium pays to raid sovereign assets held there, investors may ask, is Europe still a safe place to store my wealth, my sovereign wealth? And Euroclear has warned Weaver directly about that systemic risk. Thirdly, there's hybrid threats and security risks. Belgium has already seen suspicious drone activity over Brussels airport, military bases, ammunition storage sites. We've seen the provocations by Moscow further westwards from just Eastern Europe to Denmark or around Britain. So if Belgium signs off on using Russian assets for Ukraine's war or defense, retaliation, cyber, physical, legal, they all become much more likely. And put these three together, and Belgium isn't being petty, it's being rational, at least to De Wever's argument. The Commission, on the other hand, has tried to build a safety net under Belgium, and not just politically. Behind the scenes, a whole smorgasbord of lawyers, economists, and risk officers has spent ages attempting to design a structure that spreads this danger across the entire bloc. But every fix adds a new layer of complexity. You see, for one, EU governments would provide about 105 billion euros in bilateral guarantees until 2028. And if Russia wins a legal claim, then EU states could collectively cover the losses. Belgium's response, though, has been, well, it's not enough. They want guarantees above the loan's value, if you like. Guarantees beyond sanctions expiry, instant liquidity mechanisms. Second is that there's an overriding Hungarian vote here. As we know, the Hungarians and increasingly Slovakians have worked together to obstruct certain things around EU votes because of the unanimous voting that is required. And given their more sympathetic allegiance to Putin, we see that occurring often. Sanctions, you see, must be renewed every 6 months. That means Orban can free assets with a single no. To avoid this, Brussels wants to invoke something known as Article 122 or 122 treaty, a rarely used emergency clause to make it illegal to return the assets to Russia. It is creative, but it's also legally fragile, and if it fails again, that's Belgium on the chopping block, so to speak. And behind all of this, personality politics, poor coordination, and lack of coherence occur. Then there is something even bigger. Three things that make this crisis worse. And importantly, none of them have anything to do with Ukraine. All of them come from within the EU. This is part of the story most viewers never hear, how much these grand geopolitical decisions can hinge on these personalities, misunderstood signals, and domestic politics rather than strategy. One, Germany's Chancellor has spooked the horses. What I mean by that is that Friedrich Merz has gone public early calling for Europe to raid Russian assets. When he was elected earlier this year, that was quite strong out of the gates, and whilst it was refreshing to see someone taking more of a strong position, unlike Olaf Scholz, it has, well, affected others like Belgium. Second is Belgium's own internal miscommunication. Belgium's EU ambassador, known as Peter Moors, has been telling colleagues that progress was fine, without knowing that De Wever was opposed. The result? The EU only realised the scale of Belgium's resistance on the day of the signing, if you like. Thirdly, then, is the EU Commission President, or leader, if you like, the EU, von der Leyen. Several governments have argued that legal texts were published too late, and as one diplomat put it towards me, we have wasted a lot of time, meaning that von der Leyen's attempts to get this across have been affected and therefore it only benefits Russia. All in all, this also brings in the US. You see, because while Europe has been negotiating or delayed by these infightings, Washington was not idle, and this is where the geopolitical stakes expanded dramatically. American strategists saw that the Russian frozen assets aren't just a European issue. They are potentially the centerpiece of a future US brokered peace deal that Trump wants to obviously have his name bannered across. So whilst Europe attempts to get this done, Washington tries to push it through on its own terms. They told the EU that they want the frozen assets returned to Russia after a peace deal, then used jointly for some kind of reconstruction. Trump's original draft peace blueprint even proposed unfreezing these assets, sharing reconstruction profits, and accelerating a settlement. Now, as we've seen publicly admitted by many Europeans, this is outrageous. For Russia, it was enticing, but for Ukraine, it's of course alarming. And for Brussels, it was a reminder that indecision creates vacuums and ones that only invite Donald Trump with his transactional foreign policy. It also reminds us of the underlying rift that now exists across the transatlantic relationship. And just while it's not in the headline news, it's still lingering there and likely only deepening. So when you bring the two stories together, Europe's perfect plan and Belgium's refusal, a sharper, more unsettling picture emerges. It's not about the money. It's about what Europe is and isn't, capable of moments in crisis. For one, Europe's leverage isn't as strong as it pretends, and Belgium's ability to argue the assets are a crucial bargaining chip shows a ideological misalignment between others in the Commission, such as von der Leyen or Kaja Kallas. Second is that Europe talks about skin in the game, but also avoids paying the weaver's harsh line, if you know what I mean. When we talk about having skin in the game, it will be our skin. And without Russian assets, the alternatives are direct taxpayer funded grants or joint EU borrowing. Neither is popular, nor something that I think the EU should do. At the end of the day, if the EU can't take care of itself, then it can't take care of the Ukraine, but ultimately leaves all of it vulnerable to Putin. Thirdly, is EU unity is far more fragile than we might think. This isn't a minor disagreement, and whilst things are blown out by Putinist voices, it is clear that there is a underlying disagreement on how to establish a longer term counterbalance or counterance to not just Putin but Trump. If 27 countries can't agree on how to fund Ukraine, the consequences stretch far beyond 2025. And so three questions determine what happens next, right? Does Belgium climb down or dig in? Does the EU actually invoke, say, Article 122? Does Trump's peace push gain traction as Europe hesitates even more? Or can they somehow cobble together in that context? And all of this for Ukraine isn't abstract. It's the difference between entering next year with a funded state or facing a crash crunch during the most dangerous phase of the war during a very tough winter. I have the highest hope for Europe, and I am the biggest proponent of it. But we need to get ourselves together in terms of a collective mindset and a clear strategic vision of how we go about managing not just our relationship with America or with Russia, but also China. Macron's visit to China right now, I think, is a great illustration of what we should be saying, and more confidence amongst European leaders to say the uncomfortable truths. And as a Brit, I very much want us to be part of that too. But that's all I've got time for. Let me know in the comments below what you think. And as always, if you liked it, well, do give it a like and subscribe. It's free. We're so close to 100,000. Love to have you as part of that community. And if you want to support me further, find Buy Me a Coffee or Patreon in the description below. Take care, everyone.